direction, right? So you can from left to right. Okay. So if some particles are moving from right to left, you have to subtract that charge. If particles are moving from left to right, you add that charge. The charge in question here is the ith component of the momentum. Okay. The particle moves from left to right. Okay. It's carrying some ith component of the momentum. Another particle moves from right to left. Okay. It carries some ith component of the momentum. Okay. For this you add, for that you subtract.
Sir, but for a surface oriented in a j direction,
yes,
how can any other component of moment other than j can have flux in the j direction?
Like, we'll take one single particle, okay, which passes like this. Okay, it's carrying an ith component of the momentum, and it's moving in the j direction. Right? See, take a single particle. For a single particle, it's certainly there. Take a small area, okay, perpendicular to the two direction. Okay, suppose this is 3 direction. Okay. A particle moves like this. Okay. So it carries a certain P3, right? And it has moved from left to right along the positive 2 direction. Okay, nothing has gone from the right to left. So there is a net flux of P3 momentum through this surface along the 2 direction.
The density is carried from one place to another.
Pardon?
The density is carried from the one place to. If suppose before
momentum, yeah, basically the momentum itself. The momentum is a charge, right? That charge is carried from left to right. That's what you are measuring, right? So normally when you talk about the charge, current, right? Electric current. Electron carries some charge. Okay. You see how many electrons are moving from left to right and how many are moving from right to left, and you subtract that result, right? Now here it just so happens that the charge that is in question is the ith component of the momentum. That's also an attribute of the particle, right? It's carrying some ith component of the momentum. That's our charge. Okay. We want to know how much of that charge, okay, what is the total amount of that charge flowing from left to right minus the total amount of that charge flowing from right to left. Is this question clear? Okay. So if a single particle moves, right, it's clear what that integrated flux is, right? You take the momentum along the third direction, and that's the integrated flux. Right? If it has moved towards a positive j direction, right, it contributes an integrated flux of that much, the amount of free momentum that it has carried.
T31 would mean the energy, the momentum flux in the third direction.
T31, no, TGI means momentum flux in the r direction. So second index is the direction in which the momentum is being you are being measured.
Px ka flux along the surface oriented in say z direction.
So T31 is what you are looking at.
Yeah,
yes. So T31 means yes, it's Px flux. Okay, moving in the z direction.
Px moves in x direction. That's what I am confused. Like Px is along x direction.
But a particle is not necessarily moving either in x direction or in z direction. Particle is moving in an arbitrary direction, right? It can have both components along the third direction and the one direction, right? So if P1 is positive, okay, then it contributes plus P3 to the integrated flux. If P1 is negative, then it contributes minus P3 to the integrated flux.
P3 plus P1.
Okay, T3, yeah. So in this class, so if P1 is, if P3 is positive, okay, then total integrated flux that if the particle passes through is P1. If P3 is negative, then it's moving in the opposite direction. Then the integrated flux is minus P1. This is the interpretation. Is it okay?
So I have a question.
Yes.
Could you explain again why energy flux is 0?
Why energy flux is 0? Yeah. So energy, so you just replace P1 by energy, right? Okay. And in an isotropic situation, for a single particle, of course, it's not 0.
Okay.
But in isotropic situation, right, the amount of particles which is moving from left to right is the same as the ones that are moving from right to left.
So the
right?
energy flux being 0 will only be the case for isotropic.
Yes, exactly. So for a single particle moving through a surface, of course, no flux is 0. Right?
Of course.
In general, all fluxes are non-zero. So only in isotropic situation that the energy flux is 0. Okay. Similarly, only in isotropic situation the momentum density is 0. right? Otherwise it's not 0.
So we only require isotropy, not only.
No, right now isotropy is good enough, right? But then to conclude that this is independent of x, of course we need homogeneity. Okay, right now we are looking at the structure of T. Okay, what we expect. Okay, so is this point clear? Now again, we are going to use the notion of isotropy. Okay. Suppose you want to calculate Pgi for I not equal to j. Okay. So we are trying to calculate the charge under consideration is Pi. Okay. Particles are moving in the j direction. Okay. So if it's a completely isotropic distribution, okay, then again it doesn't care whether Pi is positive. Suppose Pi is positive. Okay. But equal number of particles will move in the positive z direction, j direction or negative j direction. Right? Because Pi doesn't give any preference as to whether the particles are moving along positive j or negative j direction. Okay? So for a fully isotropic distribution, if Pi is positive, okay, then there is no flux along the j direction of that object. Right? If Pi is negative, again the same thing. Okay? Because since the particles are moving isotropically, okay, if you fix a given value of Pi, okay, then there will be equal number of particles carrying that value of Pi moving to the left and equal similar number of particles moving to the right.
So it's again 0.
Okay. So you expect that Pgi should be 0 for j not equal to I. But now let's ask what happens if j is equal to I. So now you are calculating the flux in the ith direction and the charge that is being carried is also Pi. Okay. Now it's clear what's going to happen. If Pi is positive, then the particle is definitely moving in the positive I direction. Right? Pi is, because momentum is correlated with velocity, right? If Pi is positive, the particles are moving in the positive I direction. If Pi is negative, the particles are moving in the negative I direction. So which means if you want to calculate the number of particles moving in the positive I direction carrying Pi, certain Pi, minus the number of particles moving in the negative I direction, okay, weighted by their Pi's, it will always be positive. Right? Because positive Pi moves to the positive I direction, negative Pi moves to the negative I direction. So then you expect Tii in general is not 0. In general. Is this okay?
So Tgi is not equal to 0. You just repeat
Tgi is 0
0.
for j not equal to I. Because if j is not equal to I, right? If you are trying to calculate the total flux in the jth direction for a momentum that is in the ith direction, okay, there are two ways of thinking about it. Suppose the particle has moved in the jth direction, okay, it's equally likely to carry positive Pi or negative Pi because it's isotropic distribution, right? So the average Pi will be 0 for such particles. Particles are moved in the jth direction. Similarly, particles which are moved in the negative j direction, okay, again are equally likely to carry positive Pi or negative Pi. So the average will be 0. Okay?
So this is specifically for the isotropic case.
Yes, everything is being done for the isotropic
In
case.
general,
In general, nothing vanishes, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have introduced a symbol T mu nu, right? The fact that we use T mu nu for all mu and nu means that in general nothing vanishes, right? What we are trying to study here is only in the isotropic case, right? What are the components which vanish? Okay, so let me repeat again. So for the isotropic case, if you are talking about Pgi for j not equal to I, then the result vanishes because if the particle moves in the positive I direction, it's equally likely to carry positive or negative Pj, okay, and vice versa. You can also reverse it the same way. Suppose you look at particles with some amount of Pj, it's equally likely to move to the left or right because you are looking at ith direction. Okay, so that's another way of saying why Pgi for j not equal to I should be 0. But for j equal to I, okay, if the particle is moving along the positive I direction, we are sure that it's carrying positive Pi. And the particle is moving in a negative I direction, we are sure that it's carrying negative Pi. Okay. And as a result, the flux of Pi along the ith direction is necessarily positive.
Two times.
Pardon?
The average is 2 times.
Yes. So the number of particles moving from left to the right gives some contribution. The number of particles moving from the right to the left gives an equal contribution. Okay. So each will contribute half Tii. Right? Number of particles moving from the left to the right and number of particles moving from the right to the left. Okay. Furthermore, because of the isotropy, Tii cannot depend on which direction you are looking at.
Yeah.
Tii should be the same for all I. Right? Okay, so that shows that Tii shouldn't depend on I. Depend on I. And this tells us that Pij should have the structure of P times delta I. Okay, for some constant. We still have to, so that this constant P is what we normally think of as pressure.
Previously, we have also got this one by local.
Yes. So this is now I am giving a physical interpretation of why isotropy implies Tij equal to P delta I. Previously also we said that just by requiring P to be isotropic, to be invariant under isometry, it will arrive at this answer. But this understanding will also tell us how to interpret it. Right? That's the reason I went through this in the first place. Okay, now let's consider the following situation. So take a small cube inside the gas. Okay, so you have a gas with particles moving isotropically. Take a small cube inside the gas and exclude everything from the interior. Okay, let's suppose the interior is vacuum. Okay, so you are putting a small box, cubical box inside the gas for which you are trying to calculate Tij. So now what's going to happen? Okay, so let's look at this surface. This surface. Or maybe.
Which one?
Let me try to draw. Okay, just take this surface, the top front one. Okay. So now what's going to happen is the particles are going to be incident from this side, outside. Okay, and this we'll assume that it's an elastic box and they'll get reflected. Okay, nothing is there inside. So if we talk about particles being incident, how much will be the momentum of that incident particle? How much will be the momentum carried by the incident particle per unit time?
Twice.
Yes.
Twice.
Twice in.
They are in reflected, so the momentum changes.
So forget about reflection first. I want to know first that if we just look at the amount of incident particles,
Number.
right? How much momentum will hit this one?
Area
Density
times
into
So area delta A times,
velocity.
Dotted with your
but we have to write in terms of those. We don't want velocity and number density and all.
Oh.
The momentum flux is already given in terms of t, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what is it that you have to write there?
TII.
TI.
Tii. So if this I direction, right? But to calculate the tangential momentum, we don't care.
Yes.
Okay? Only the normal momentum we want to calculate. So Tii. But it's not Tii. Okay? It's half Tii.
Half TI.
Because earlier, half of the contribution was coming because particles are going from that side to this side. Right? Half were coming because they are going from outside to inside. Now the interior is vacuum, right? Nothing is happening in the interior. So just if you look at the particles which are falling from outside, it should be half tii. Okay, because particles are coming only from one side.
So there is no difference between upper II and lower II.
Because you have taken the metric to be delta I, right? I mean, we are talking just a flat Minkowski space time. So this is the total momentum imparted per unit time. But since the wall has been assumed to be elastic, that gets reflected back. Right? With exactly the same momentum in the normal direction, or opposite momentum in the normal direction, same momentum in the tangential direction. So how much is the net momentum transfer?
This times 2.
This times 2.
That will be this times 2. Right? Because a certain amount of momentum gets incident and it gets reflected back with exactly opposite side in the normal direction. So this is the total rate of momentum that is being transferred to this box.
Per unit time.
Right? Because the particles come in and go back. But this by definition, so this is the total force. This is the total momentum transfer per unit time, right? So this is the total force on this area. Okay. But that by definition is pressure times delta E. That's the definition of pressure, right?
Sir, particle can incident making some angle also means.
Yes. So the particle can make incident making some angle, right? And it gets reflected like this. Okay. So the tangential component of momentum doesn't change in that process. Right? What changes is the transverse component. Right? And that's exactly what this measures, right? Because Tii is the momentum flux along the I direction. It's carrying the Pi flux, right? It doesn't care about what the tangential component is doing. Okay? So it's the normal component that is getting reversed, and that's what we're calculating here. So is this clear? Right? This is what we normally call pressure, right? Force per unit area on this area. So this tells us that pressure, the usual pressure that we think of is indeed Tii, and that's what we are calling P. Okay, so this definition of pressure agrees with the usual definition of pressure that you are familiar with in normal thermal system. Because this tells us that if we know what the thermodynamics of that of the source of energy density is, you can directly read out the relation between pressure and energy density without having to go through the detailed calculation again. But of course, if you did the detailed calculation of T mu nu, you should get the same answer.
Yes.
Okay? But it's just that by doing this, you can get the answer without having to do any detailed calculation if you know thermodynamics of the underlying system. So that's the utility of interpreting this number P as pressure. Okay, otherwise you could have just called this P and worked with it.
Sir, for the general case, then would it involve a sum over like Tij sum over j from like 1 to 3? Momentum components in all three directions?
No, because the point is that the Tij, what does it measure? Tij measures J flux, right? Okay. But that flux is not transferred on this box. You see, imagine that it's carrying it's incident like this. Okay, then it will carry also a Pj, right? But when it gets reflected, the Pj remains the same.
Okay, so change in momentum is only happening around the...
Yeah, change in momentum is only happening in the normal direction. Right? So that's why Tij makes no difference here. Okay, even if Tij was there, it will not contribute to this process. Okay, so now we will try to calculate the P directly, okay, for different kinds of matter. Okay, we can of course use thermodynamics and we will use it when we want it. Okay, but we might as well also directly try to calculate P for various kinds of systems and see what results we get. And all these calculations we will be doing in flat space. Where with taking G mu nu equal to eta mu nu, because as we saw, that we can reduce the calculation, okay, of P to flat space, because you can always make a change of coordinates so that locally the metric looks like eta mu nu. Okay, so you might as well do the calculation taking metric to be eta mu nu, okay, and then use the result, the relationship between P and rho that you will find. You can use it in the general case, okay, because that's just a coordinate transformation.
Sir,
Yes.
the Pij component won't contribute because we define pressure such that it's a normal component of a force.
Well, pressure is not normal pressure is, yeah, see, it doesn't exert any tangential component anyway, because if it's elastic collision, right, it doesn't impart any tangential momentum. See, elastic collision by definition, right, changes the normal component of the momentum but doesn't change the tangential component, right. So the incident particle may carry a Pj, okay, but by the time it has gotten reflected, it carries back that Pj, right. It's not transferring any momentum. That's why that mixed component, Tij component, doesn't contribute.
So, won't it like we have taken a vacuum in this case and showed that for elastic collisions only this is the pressure, like
Yes,
what
upon
we
if
should
it's not.
actually do is just take a vacuum case and see how much force the other particles are applying.
No, actually, elastic collision only means that the energy is conserved, right? If it's not elastic, then it will start heating up the box, right? Then what will happen to the energy? Eventually, you have to deal with elastic collision only, right? You have to assume the total energy that is transferred to the box is coming back. Right? So the fact that you are using elastic collision, okay, it's a, to define pressure formally, it's easiest to use elastic collision.
So otherwise del mu T mu will no longer be 0.
Yeah, if it's not elastic, right, then the box, in the presence of the box, energy will start increasing, right, because it will keep absorbing energy from that incident particle.
So
Yes.
this T mu nu is like this in the local inertial frame.
Yes.
But when we go to a general frame, then this part, the 3x3 part, that will mix up the pressure and all.
Yeah, but we are not allowing you to go to a general frame in which T and Xi gets mixed. Okay?
No, not T. I mean only spatial parts.
Yeah, so the point is because Tij is proportional to Gij, right? If if in the spatial frame Tij is proportional to delta Ij, by the time you have gone to a general frame, then delta Ij will just get replaced by Gij, right? Nothing else will change.
So it no longer be a diagonal there.
Yeah, if Gij is not diagonal, it will not be diagonal, yes. If Gij is not diagonal, of course, we have taken the Gij to be diagonal,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, the G11 and GRR and G theta theta and G phi phi are not the same. So T will also not have that property.
Okay.
Right? But this argument was given in a locally flat space time. Okay. But what you can take back from here is that Tij, even if you go to a general frame by making change of spatial coordinates, Tij will remain proportional to Gij. Right? That's what isotropy will mean. Is that point clear? Okay. Because Gij and Tij transforms in the same way under a coordinate transformation of the Xi's. Okay. So if we have worked in a frame where Gij is delta Ij and Tij is also proportional to delta Ij, then any other frame, Tij and Gij will be proportional to each other. Okay, and the proportionality constant will remain the same. Okay, so let's suppose we have a set of particles. Okay, this is what we had discussed briefly yesterday, but let me do this again. So, for a set of particles, this time we will be working in flat space time, so that some of the formula will simplify. So, it's given by sum for n. If there are n particles, capital N particles, then integral d tau remain dxn mu d tau dxn okay, that's square root of determinant G factor, etc. not there. But we of course want to take the average, okay, on the right hand side. So we have to take an average.
Statistical average.
Statistical average. You'll assume that there are lots of particles moving around, and you have to take the statistical average. Okay, so or you can say that by the time you have taken n to infinity, and if there's a randomly moving, right, you are automatically taking an average.
So it's nothing, doesn't matter whether time average or ensemble.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's time average or average of a large number of particles. So T naught naught will be given by, okay, let's just make life a little more simpler by assuming that all particles carry same mass. Okay, it is not necessary. Well, let's assume that all particles carry same mass. So this is still x1. So T naught naught will be given by m T naught I and Tij.
So would it be a capital X in the delta?
Yes, capital X.
This averaging over which thing we are doing?
Well, you can take it to be average of a large number of particles, right? Okay, or averaging over a little bit of time. Okay, if the particles are small time average. It's basically that you are thinking of a large collection of particles and you are taking the average over those.
We are actually summing over all the particles.
Yeah, so summing over n essentially is the average. Okay. If the number of particles is very large, then when you are taking summing over very large number of particles, that is effectively you are doing averaging over all the particles.
Yeah, you are multiplying the total number of particles multiplied by average.
Exactly, that's right. Okay, so this sum over n will now become trivial because it will not depend on n.
And then we'll give you n.
Yeah, so there is total number of particles times this.
We'll replace it by average.
Yeah, we'll just replace it by average. No, I'm saying that this, we have replaced it by average, but we don't have to do that because sum over large number of particles, okay, does the job of averaging. Okay, is basically what you are saying is that if we have sum over n for some quantity n, okay, then this for very large number of particles, okay, you can think of this as, well, in fact this is the definition of average. You don't even need large number of particles. This is sum over n. Okay, because average of n is the total number of particles you divide by sum over n. Okay. So by definition this is the total number of particles times this. Okay, but now we use isotropy, and using isotropy we know that this should vanish. Okay, that's what we argued anyway, and that this will vanish because there will be equal number of particles moving in the positive and negative I direction, carrying same energy, dx or beta.
And the dx not beta, that is a monotonically increasing also.
Dx not monotonically increasing. This is some positive function, positive object. Right? Dx and I beta can be both positive and negative.
Yes.
So this is 0, and this we know is proportional to delta Ij. Right? Again, by we give the argument in detail, but it's the same here. Okay, in terms of this, you can, because these are just velocity vectors. So this will be proportional to delta Ij. So this is P times delta Ij. But starting from here, we can now calculate P, because you can take the contraction of delta Ij. Multiply by delta Ij. Okay, and take contraction.
So you are taking average.
Pardon?
That is an average.
Yeah, this means average. Now, if we multiply by delta Ij, then this side becomes 3p. Right? Because delta Ij gives you 3. So you will get 3p is equal to m, sum over n.
Sum over I.
Yes, sum over I. I multiply and contract. Contraction means I am summing over I. That's why it becomes 3p here. It's clear, and the right hand side becomes this. Okay, now we are going to use the fact that dxn naught d tau, dxn naught d tau is equal to 1 plus dxn I d tau. Okay, this just says that dx mu is the proper type, d tau square. Is this relation familiar? Okay? dx mu d tau is minus 1. So now we can consider two extreme cases. First, imagine that the particles are moving very slowly. Okay. When will that happen? When the particles are non-relativistic. Moving very slowly means slow compared to the velocity of light. This will happen if kT, the k is the Boltzmann constant, if kT is the average energy, right? If that is much smaller than the rest mass energy of the particle, then you expect that the particles will move slowly. Right? That's non-relativistic limit. Is that clear? When the temperature is, or the k times temperature, that's the energy, is much smaller than the rest mass energy. So that's called a non-relativistic gas. So non-relativistic gas will have this thing almost equal to 0. And again we are setting c equal to 1. So when you say velocities are small, that means this is almost equal to 0. So dxn I d tau, dxn I d tau is almost equal to 0, and dxn naught d tau dxn naught d tau will be equal to 1. So that basically tells us P naught is proportional to the total number of particles which are present. What will be called at n times. This gives you just 1. Okay, with a delta function, of course, depending on where the particle is located. Okay. And you just add up their masses. There's less mass energy. But Tij is almost 0. And that's important. So Tij is 0. Which means P equal to 0. Now let's look at the other limit, relativistic limit. This is when the Boltzmann constant times temperature is much larger than the rest mass energy. So in this limit, what do you expect this to be?
Almost equal to dx.
Yes, this should be, well, it's almost equal to, I mean, it's 1 plus this, right? So when does it become almost equal to?
Means very large concentration.
Yeah, so this is basically very large. That's a relativistic limit. Okay. Particles are moving almost at the speed of light, right? So dxi dt approaches 1. But that means that dxi d tau becomes very large. Okay, relativistic limit means that particles, ultra-relativistic particles are when dxi dt is approaching 1. Okay, but when you measure in proper time, because d tau is d tau square is dt square minus dx square, right? So dxi d tau actually is going to infinity because that's momentum, right?
So actually, we are saying that for high velocity tau is already small.
Yes, because particles are moving. I mean, it's time dilation, right? That's what it is saying. See, the word dxi d tau is the component of a momentum. It's pi. Yeah, that's the easiest. M times dxi d tau is pi, right? And when the particles are moving very fast, then their pi is much larger than the rest mass,
Yes.
right? So that's another way of saying that this should become very large. If this becomes very large, then these two are almost equal. You can ignore the 1. Okay, so dx naught d tau, dx naught d tau is almost equal to dx n I d tau, dx n I d tau.
So particles for radiation,
Yes.
this is exactly true.
Yes. So the point is now, this is almost like radiation because you have taken the particles to be relativistic, right? So they are moving at the speed of light. And you can now see what it implies for the relationship between P naught naught, which is rho, and P. Right? What does it imply for rho and P?
P equals to
2 rho by 3.
So rho is 3P. Right? Because these are equal. Right? There is a factor of 3 because you have to do the contraction. Right? That's the angular average which gave this 1/3 factor. So this tells us that P equal to rho by 3. Okay, which is something that you are also familiar with from thermodynamics. Okay, relativistic gas, okay, the gas of photons has P equal to rho by 3. Right? But the gas of photons also you can treat this way. You can think of a gas of photon as a limiting case of this when it becomes ultra relativistic. Now it looks a little strange because there is an m sitting here. Photon of course has m equal to 0. Right? So
d tau is also 0.
yeah, so the point is if you want to write the formula in such a way that it applies for the photon, what you will do is that you will take this factor of m and absorb it to dxn d tau, write this as p tau. Okay, m dxn d tau is p tau, right? The momentum component. And then this tau, now there is a integral d tau and then dx d tau, right? This you can change to any parameter now. Because one d tau factor upstairs, one d tau factor downstairs. Okay? You can change it to any affine parameter u. Okay? So that, because for the photon d tau is 0, right? So it doesn't make sense as it stands. So, but you can rewrite this equation, okay, even for the non-relativistic case, in a way where this is replaced by p and this d tau is replaced by du and du. And then it applies to photons, right? Because now there is no mass anywhere, no proper time anywhere. Is this clear? Right? Because otherwise what's happening for the photon is that m is going to 0 but so is d tau. Okay? That's why you are not seeing that this formula makes sense there. Okay? Once you rewrite in these variables, okay, in terms of momentum and affine parameter, then it applies to also photons. Are there any questions? Okay. So now let's say a few words about radiation. Okay, what is the relationship between P and rho for radiation? Okay, we already have got two ways. Okay, one is by taking the relativistic limit of this problem. The second way is by using thermodynamics. Right? You are familiar from thermodynamics that for radiation P is rho by 3. But there is a third way of doing it, which is that you calculate that, write down the T mu nu for electromagnetism. In flat space. Okay, so this you can express in terms of E and B. This you are familiar with, right? In fact, we wrote down the formula in terms of F mu nu, but you can convert it into E and B, okay, different components. Okay. Then you have to take averages, right? Because we are looking at not a single electromagnetic wave. Okay. So what you have to do is you have to take average over electromagnetic waves propagating in all directions. Okay. So how will you take the average? You will use again this fact that EI EJ should be proportional to delta Ij, right? By isotropy. Pardon? See, otherwise you write down the expression for T in terms of E and B, and then you have to take averages. Right? And you have to use this various identities involving averaging. So EIJ should be proportional to delta Ij, and then you know that this is equal to 1/3 E square times delta Ij. Once you know that it's proportional to delta Ij, you can take the contraction and calculate the constant of proportionality. Right? It's 1/3 E square delta Ij.
It's due to isotropy.
Yes, due to isotropy. Right? It's from isotropy. So this is from isotropy. But once you have got this, then 1/3 factor is calculated
Yes, sir.
by the same argument. Right? Then we got the 3p. We just take the contraction with delta Ij and you get this 1/3. But for calculating the energy moment of tensor, of course, this is not enough. You need BIBJ, for example, right? You need BIBJ or EIBJ. These also have averages also you have to calculate. However, for a given electromagnetic wave, B is determined in terms of E. Right? B is not an independent variable. Okay. So I'll leave it to you as an exercise. Check from this. That P is equal to 1/3. So basically everything then can be calculated in terms of this 1/3 E square. This overall, so this is the only unknown. Okay, this fixes the overall energy density, 1/3 E square. All of this can be converted to this. Okay, and then you can calculate Tij, T naught naught, and you can verify this relation. Okay, that will be a third way of calculating the energy moment of tensor for electromagnetic wave.
Sir, what is the expression averaging over time? Is it time and
Yes, so you can do average over one period, for example, right? To calculate these, it is useful to have average over one period. Okay? But you are also doing averages over electromagnetic waves moving in different directions. See this, for example, you get
fields at a point, right? We are-
yes, these are fields at a point, but it's the superposition of electromagnetic waves moving in all different directions with arbitrary phases.
We are assuming ergodicity.
Yes, we are assuming that these are just random electromagnetic waves, right? Propagating, it's a superposition of many electromagnetic waves, each with different phase, right? Different amplitude, and you are just averaging over all of them. Right? That's the meaning of averaging. Right? There is a superposition of many electromagnetic waves, okay, whose phases are totally uncorrelated. Okay, and whose directions are also uncorrelated.
So if you have two fields
Yes.
and you take an average over two fields, like here like E's and B's, you are taking an average.
Yes.
This average isotropy will guarantee you that it will be of a form of delta Ej.
Yes.
Will it guarantee you that?
EIBJ.
EIBJ.
Yes, yeah, it will guarantee it should be in the form of delta by Ij, but you should check.
So EIJ,
The point is EIJ, this is clear. Okay. But once you have assumed this, okay, then the rest you should be able to derive.
But the average EIBJ should be 0.
You have to check.
It should be because it's the T0I component, T0I.
Okay, so you should be able to prove this, right? Yes. But the point is that B is not independent of E,
Yeah.
right? So B is determined in terms of E, right? B is not in the same direction as E, right? So you might have worried that it doesn't look like it's 0, right?
No, no.
For a given EI, yeah, it should be 0, but you should check it. I mean, what happens is that the E and B are out of phase. So when you integrate over a period, it gets 0. Right? So this averaging is over all directions, but also integrated over one period. Right? And that will make this. So averaging basically means averaging in all possible ways, right? Time average, okay, average over different phases. Okay, so anything that you can set to 0 by symmetry, you set to 0. Okay? But at the end of all this, you should recover this result.
So there actually what you are doing, like time averaging or summed over superposition part of each wave component of the field. What do you
Well, in a sense, it's equivalent because the time averaging averages over time. But if you say that okay, you don't know time averaging, but at any given instant there are waves of different phases, that's equivalent to doing a time averaging.
Yeah. Okay, so if I want to look at as summed over superposition, still will I get that EIBJ will be?
Yes, you should get 0. I mean, if you do the averaging properly, you should get EIBJ average equal to 0. Okay? Because if the time average is 0, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then if you work at a given instant, okay, that means that for some wave it may be non-zero, but for some other wave which is slightly behind phase, it's different, right? It has different sign because that's why time averaging is 0. So basically, if you sum over many different waves with many different phases, then even at a given time it will become 0. Right? But looking at time averaging is a good way of making something 0, right? Because you are allowed to do time averaging, right? Because you always have waves in different phases, okay, which are also superimposed.
Sir, the mod average of E squared, that will give me rho, that is because E squared is the energy density.
Yes.
Pressure in terms of E's and B's, what is the
Well, you have the full expression for T mu nu, right?
In terms of
For from the Maxwell's by looking at the Maxwell Lagrangian, you wrote down the full expression for T mu nu in the covariant form.
Yes, sir.
You can always rewrite in terms of EI and BJ.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what you have to use.
But I mean,
So
in
anything-
electromagnetic waves, the pressure is different for total absorption and total reflection.
Pressure is different from?
I mean, suppose you have something,
Yes.
screen or something, then total absorption, total reflection.
Yeah, you always have to assume total reflection.
Total reflection.
Because if it absorbs, that means you are not conserving energy. Right? Okay. So this takes care of matter and radiation. Now you have to talk about a third kind of source of T mu nu. Okay, and that's the cosmological constant. So originally the cosmological constant was introduced just as a term in the Einstein's equation, okay, which basically modifies the gravitational equations. So the Einstein's equation you write as R mu nu minus half R T mu nu as minus 8 pi T. So T mu nu, so this is the usual Einstein's equation. Now cosmological constant is a modification of Einstein's gravity, at least that's the way it was introduced first, where you also have a term like this. Lambda is some constant.
Lambda here is positive.
Well, it can be positive or negative. So lambda is not as a cosmological constant. If it's positive cosmological constant. If it's negative cosmological constant.
The conventional sign is minus in between this.
Yeah, conventional sign is minus because the point is positive cosmological constant gives positive energy density. Because G naught naught is negative, right? That takes care of this minus sign, right? So positive cosmological, so that's one way of remembering that positive cosmological constant should be positive energy density.
So that would give the de-acceleration.
That will give,
De-acceleration, what you were.
yeah, we'll see how exactly it comes about. Okay, right now it's just a term in the. So you can think of it as I said, originally it was introduced just as a term in Einstein's equation. Okay? So even in the absence of matter, this term is always there. It is just a parameter that he introduced in the theory. Okay. You can also derive it from an action principle. Okay. So if you want to derive it from the action principle, all you have to do is to add a term proportional to lambda integral square root of minus determinant g d for x to s. Okay. So this is a perfectly general quantity invariant term. Right? It's a scalar, so you can add this and add it to the Einstein-Hilbert action, and it gives you something. This basically gives this equation of motion. But more modern perspective, which of course also encompasses the original viewpoint, is that this lambda could be dynamical. It could actually be a field, okay, or some combination of fields, okay, which may have its own dynamics. There may be lambda itself may have some its own equation of motion, right? Or lambda may be some phi square. If phi is a scalar field, lambda could be phi square. So if phi is non-zero, then there will be non-zero lambda. So that is a slightly more general in the sense that it's allowing, by allowing it to be a field, you also allow it to vary as a function of time. Okay, it could happen. It may not happen, but that's an additional freedom that you allow this to happen. Is this clear?
So if I bring in any dependence, this equation, this
Yes.
will be, if you take d mu on both sides, this will be manifestly, this will satisfy this equation.
Yeah, because d mu nu is 0 anyway.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But if we introduce some dependence in lambda,
Yes.
then
Well, the point is d mu of total thing is 0, right? See, the consistency condition is that d mu of this mu lambda should be 0, because d mu t mu nu may not be 0 anymore. Right? We will elaborate on this later. But the consistency of Einstein's equation. See, the very fact that you can derive it from an action, okay, where lambda could be a function of x and t. Well, in that case, lambda should go inside. means that there is no inconsistency in the equations of motion. Okay, it's that you have to change also t, allow t to change.
Sir,
Yes.
fields are not dimensionless. No? When we are saying fields, some physical field, then the field have dimensions,
Yes.
different field. So when you are saying that lambda, we can think of some field.
Yes.
Then if we can think of different fields,
Yes.
then different fields will have different dimensions.
Yes.
So the equations, then the dimension matching will be.
No, lambda can be some field but multiplied by a constant to set the dimension, to compensate for the dimension, right?
And the constant will have the right
See,
dimension.
the total term has to have dimension 4,
Hmm.
right? Because action is dimensionless. Okay? But then lambda can come from various sources, right? Lambda can be 5 to the 4, for example, if phi is a scalar field,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Or lambda could be m square phi square, where m is the mass parameter. So dimension by itself doesn't restrict it to depend on field, right? It just says that if you have appropriate power of field, some power of field, then the corresponding constant that multiplies it must compensate for the dimension. Okay.
Sir, in that context, actually, this additive term actually becomes the kind of the theory of some scalar field coupled to gravity. That kind of term you are adding, right? In that case.
Well, yeah, that's one possibility, right? But it could also be a theory of some other field,
Maybe.
which gives you a term like this. Lambda may be F mu nu, F mu nu, right?
The added term in that case becomes the Lagrangian field coupled to gravity as background, right?
Well, it could be part of the Lagrangian. There may be other terms in the Lagrangian involving that field.
In process will not necessarily even bosonic. Anything it can be. Any field.
Well, action of course is always bosonic, right?
No, lambda maybe psi bar psi it can be.
It could be psi bar psi, right? But then it's not classical because formally also you don't do classical field theory,
Hmm.
right? There of course lambda has to be some expectation value of psi bar psi.
Hmm.
It can come from there also. Okay? But a general perspective is the lambda could be some function of other fields,
Hmm.
okay, in whatever form. It need not be a constant.
In that case,
I mean, a simple example is just add a scalar field with a potential, okay? And that, so the T mu nu for the scalar field,
Hmm.
okay, will have a part which will look like this. Okay, if you have a scalar field with potential and you calculate T mu nu, you will find that that gives a part, okay, which is basically proportion of potential, which is this G mu nu.
in that case, the T mu nu in the upper equation is the full T mu nu.
Yes, so the point of this T mu nu, right, we have already said that we will include matter contribution, radiation contribution. There will be additional things, right? The only other additional thing that we will be considering is this one. We are trying to consider the most general thing. If you have considered the most general thing, then of course you didn't have to divide it like this, right? But when you are saying that we will consider different kinds of energy momentum tensor, you have included matter, you have included radiation, and now you are saying that we will include another piece, right, which is of this kind. But this lambda may not be strictly a constant. Okay? It could be coming from some scalar field part.
So, but if you take a lambda as a function of space and time, then for the rest of the T mu nu contains electromagnetic field and matter correspondingly.
Yes.
Then you will have to couple it to somehow so that your D mu of a whole thing should be zero, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's a consistency condition, of course.
So you will couple with your matter and electromagnetic.
Yeah, and as you will see that this will happen automatically if the theory is if the coupling is general coordinate invariant.
In that case, what the lambda will couple to also the matter and electromagnetic field.
It could couple, right?
But lambda you are treating as a scalar field.
No, I am not treating as anything. I am just saying lambda is there. We will allow lambda to vary, depend on time.
So what is the general coordinate transformation law for lambda?
It's like it has to transform like a scalar. It need not be a fundamental scalar field, but it has to transform like a scalar because otherwise it will not be Lorentz general coordinate invariant equation of motion, right? Or this will not be general coordinate invariant Lagrangian. Right? Is that when you write a lambda term like this? Okay? This could be a constant, but this could also be a function of various other fields that we don't know of. Is this okay? So for this, P mu nu, P lambda mu nu is just minus lambda times T mu, right? So T lambda rho, sorry, T lambda 0 0, or let me call it rho lambda, which by definition is T lambda 0 0. This is lambda, because G naught naught for us is minus 1. Okay, minus dt square plus, and P lambda is minus lambda.
Sir, for when we signature is plus minus minus minus, there its sign is plus.
Yeah, I think for plus minus minus minus, the sign will be plus. I mean, I have to rework out the signs, right? But we are using minus plus plus plus.
Yes, that's
So
what.
there the sign is minus. Yes. Okay, is this clear? Okay. Tij is minus lambda Gij, right? And P by definition is the proportionality constant between Tij and Gij. Okay, that's why P lambda is minus lambda, and rho lambda is lambda. Okay. So this gives us that P lambda equal to minus rho lambda. So let me write again what the setup of the problem. So our P mu nu that we will be using will contain a sum of three components: the matter part, radiation part, and cosmological constant part. Matter part, why you have to include is clear, right? Of course, most of what we see is matter. Radiation part, okay, is not quite clear, okay, but we have cosmic microwave background radiation. Okay, at least we know that that radiation is there. Okay, except that today, if you look at their contribution to the energy density, it's very very small. Okay, so for today's universe, we can ignore the radiation contribution. Okay. Nevertheless, we will see that this is not always the case, right? Very early in the universe, radiation would have been a dominant component. So, for keeping in mind that we will be dealing with also early universe, we will allow a radiation component. Okay. And this is only recent, right? 20 years ago, people wouldn't have included this, okay, but now we know from experiment that this component is also there. So, for this, so the relationship is Pm is equal to 0, Pr is equal to minus is equal to 1/3 rho r, and P lambda is equal to minus rho lambda. Okay, these are the equations of state which relates P and rho. And these are the relations we now want to use in the equations that we have found.
Friedmann.
The Friedmann equation and the conservation law. But now we see that we have a new problem. So let's recall, okay, what we had found earlier. Okay, earlier we had said that our unknowns are A of t, rho of t, and P of t. Okay. Equations, there are two equations. The Friedmann equation, and let me write down the two equations anyway. So the Friedmann equation was A dot square over A square plus A over A square is equal to 8 pi G by 3 rho, and the conservation law d dt of rho A cube plus 3p A dot A square equal to 0. Okay. So we have two equations, two differential equations, okay, three variables, okay, and then we said that if we can find a relationship between rho and p, we are done. But now we have complicated our life, right? Because you see, we have not two extra variables, we have 6 extra variables, right? P r rho r, P m rho m, and P lambda rho lambda. Okay. We have got 3 relations over here. So these we can forget. Okay. So you have A and rho m, rho r, and rho lambda. So 4 unknown constants. Still 2 equations. Right? This rho is the total rho. Okay. And this P is the total P. Okay, so you are not getting anywhere, right? We are still short of equations. Yeah, we have 2 equations, we have 4 variables. Is this clear?
But we have experiment.
We have?
Means experiment means.
Well, the experiment can only give initial condition. It cannot supply as differential equation, right?
No, I'm saying that these values of lows, we.
Today, yes, today we know all of these. But you want to find a differential equation that tells us what it was earlier and later, right?
Otherwise, they will just 3 parameters.
Yeah, otherwise you cannot solve them. I mean, unless you have 4 differential equations, we cannot hope to solve these, right? Is this point clear? Okay. So you have to make some additional assumption. Okay. And this assumption, okay, is that the energy momentum conservation, okay, holds independently for each component. Okay, which means that this will replace my 3 equations: d dt of rho m a cube plus 3 em d dot a square equal to 0, d dt of rho r a cube plus 3 er a dot a square equal to 0, and the last one, d dt of rho lambda a cube plus 3 p lambda a dot a square.
So why this assumption?
Yes, so I'll explain where this comes from. Okay. But if we assume this, then you are back into business, right? Because now you have 4 differential equations. One was here and then 3 more here. Okay. And those 4 differential equations can now determine the 4 unknown constants A and rho m, rho r, and rho lambda. Is this clear?
So you are not assuming that there is any interaction between.
Yes, so we'll see where this comes from, right? What this differential equation, what this individual conservation law mean. Okay, so these conservation laws, okay, if you can translate to covariant form. So assuming this is equivalent to assuming the following thing. Is equivalent to assuming that d mu t m mu nu is 0, d mu t r mu nu is 0, and d mu t lambda mu nu. Yeah, because we said last time, Kanisha said left as an exercise, that starting from d mu t mu nu equal to 0, you can derive this. Right? So if it so happens that individually they satisfy these conservation laws, then you are done. Okay? But now we have to ask, what does this mean physically, right? Under what condition will this happen that these are the conservation laws? Now naively you might think that okay, they shouldn't interact. Okay? but it can never be that they don't interact, because everything interacts gravitationally. Right? So clearly, if you have to demand that they don't interact, you cannot satisfy that equation. Right? Everything gravitates. Right? So if you have matter and radiation, they have gravitational force, right, which is part of Einstein's equation. Okay. So you have to see whether there is some other assumption, okay, some more relaxed assumption that can lead to this.
Actually, if they, then it is possible.
Well, if they exist in equilibrium, meaning okay, if it's perfect equilibrium, if A is not changing, if there is no evolution, then of course these don't change individually, right? In equilibrium, by definition, these have to be constant. But if there is an evolution, then in principle during the evolution they could exchange, they could exchange that thing, right?
It actually also changed because in the early universe radiation dominated, but now not.
Yeah, but that will not because of the exchange, right? That we will see that. Okay, but let's try to see under what condition we can prove this. Okay, we can establish this. Okay, so for this, what we have to do is we have to basically get a slightly different perspective on this equation. Okay, where does this come from? Okay. One, we saw it comes from Einstein's equation, right? Because d mu of r mu nu minus half r g mu nu is identically 0, so the right hand side better be 0. But that doesn't tell us about individual terms. Right? It tells us how overall it should satisfy d mu t mu. So we will derive the energy momentum conservation again, okay, but from a slightly different perspective. So let's suppose that we have some set of variables which are all lumped together into phi I. Okay? Phi I could be some fields, collection of fields. Okay, not necessarily scalars. Scalars, vectors, tensors, whatever. It could even be coordinates of particles, x mu. Okay, we don't care about it. Some set of fields phi I. And consider an action which is a function of phi I and g mu nu. So this does not contain the Einstein-Hilbert term. This is just an action involving phi I and g mu. Okay, so for example, if you have a scalar field, it's a scalar field part of the action, right? Not the Einstein part. If it's a Maxwell field, it's a Maxwell field part of the action, not the Einstein part. Now suppose this is general coordinate invariant. Okay, typically the actions are general coordinate invariant, right? Even if you forget about the Einstein-Hilbert is separately general coordinate invariant. Okay? So rest of the action is general coordinate invariant. So suppose S is general coordinate invariant. What is its consequence? Okay, so let's try to study what will be the consequence of that. So consider infinitesimal general coordinate transformation. Which I take to be x prime mu and x mu minus xi mu of x. But this is infinitesimal, it is small. So under this, g mu nu goes to g prime mu nu and phi will go to phi prime. Okay, depending on how it transforms. And we will define delta g mu nu as g prime mu nu of x minus g mu nu of x, and phi prime delta phi as phi prime of x minus phi of x. Okay, notice that the arguments are the same. Okay, just how g has changed its functional form. So if it was isometry, then this would be 0. Okay, that's what we had. Delta g mu nu is this, delta phi is this. Now for delta g mu nu, we have a formula. Okay, this is d mu psi nu plus d nu psi nu. Okay, this we had derived. We derived it in the context of isometry, but we first calculated delta g mu nu for a general transformation, right? And then we say that for isometry this has to vanish.
Killing.
What?
Killing vector.
Yeah, but now we are not talking about killing vector. We are talking about a general coordinate transformation, right? And this was the formula that found. That's what you are to use.
You said phi is not necessarily scalar.
It's not necessarily scalar. Phi could be vector, right? So phi I, let me write. Okay, so I index could be vector index also. Okay, we are not making any commitment as to what phi's are. Okay, it may not be we are field, right? It can be coordinated by particle. Okay, all of these are allowed. Now we know that the action, this action, let me call this S phi, okay, because this is not total action. There are other parts. Okay, the Einstein-Hilbert is separate from this. Okay, S phi. But S phi is independent general coordinate independent. That's the assumption. Right? So we know that S phi is 0 under this change. Right? This is general coordinate invariance. But on the other hand, you can calculate S phi explicitly from here. One is integral d4x. And then let me write this very formally. Delta is delta phi I times delta phi I. In fact, I should not call it x because you don't even know if these are fields or not. Okay, if these are fields, that index is in I. Okay, you instead of summing over I will include integration over x.
So would there be space-time integral d4x?
Here, so that's what I was saying. That is including the sum over I. Okay, I contains information about both space-time index as well as any other index it's carrying. Okay, the reason for doing this is because I could also, phi need not be a field, right? It could be x mu of tau.
No, sir, I'm saying about the integral.
This integral.
It is complete a whole thing.
This.
This is also the integral.
No, because phi need not be a function of x, right? See, if phi is a function of x, the sum over I will include the space-time integral. It's clear. I'm just trying to. I mean, if it was if phi is your fields, I could have written as an integral.
Okay.
Okay. So if you are happy with just taking phi as to be fields, we could do that, right? But we also want to discuss matter, right? Which are just particles moving around, right? Which are not coming from a field. Okay. We also want to include those into this analysis.
But at that point also you can have something like delta of x minus x and make it a density kind of.
That is true, but phi you will not have any argument which is small x. D mu you will have, but phi you will not have. Right? So that's why I have written it as sum over I. Okay, in other words, all
variables.
Yeah, all levels of phi we are including in I. Okay, including space-time levels.
Okay.
Okay, G mu nu I am separately treating as a field because G mu nu you are sure that it's a field, right? So G mu nu you are treating as a field, but here everything I am treating as a space-time index, as an index. So this is an identity, but this by definition up to a sign is square root of minus determinant t times t mu nu phi. Right, up to a normalization function, it is proportional. Is that clear? Yeah, that was the definition of T mu nu, right? When you derive the Einstein-Hilbert action from when you derive the Einstein's equation from a variational principle, right? This is how you had introduced RT, right? As a variation of the action with respect to G mu nu. Is that clear? This one, what can you say about this? Not much in general. But what you know is that this is 0 if phi I satisfies equation of motion. And classically, of course, everything satisfies equation of motion. Is this clear?
So this derivative with respect to phi a,
Yes.
actually you have written phi.
This one?
No, del s phi.
Oh, del S phi, because I call this S phi, this action.
Oh.
This is just a level. This is action for phi. Right? There are other parts of the action which is Einstein-Hilbert, for example. Okay? So that's why I have written del x, delta S phi. And because it's delta S phi, it's corresponding to energy moment of inertia, I'm calling T phi. Is this clear?
Why is this 0 from equation of motion?
The Euler Lagrange equation is delta S delta phi equal to 0, right? You extremize with respect to arbitrary variation of phi to derive the equation of motion.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So if the equation of motion is satisfied, then this is 0 by definition. Is it clear? The Euler Lagrange equation for phi in the action principle is this.
Yeah.
Right? You make an arbitrary variation of phi and it should be 0 to first order. Delta G mu nu is d mu xi nu plus d mu xi nu. Right? That's here. So then the net result is proportional to overall constant of proportionality. I'm forgetting. Integral square root of d4x square root of minus determinant g d phi d mu xi nu. The other term you can forget because it's symmetric. Okay? T mu nu is already symmetric and mu1 nu, so only one term is enough. But this now you can integrate by parts. Plus boundary part, which you don't do. Here we use one of the identities that we had derived in the class. That d mu then you can integrate d mu by parts through square root of minus determinant g, right, as long as it's total derivative, as long as it's covariant derivative. So what this is saying is that this was, we started with 0, right? Okay. So this is 0. This is 0 when phi satisfies the equation of motion. But this is 0 for arbitrary xi nu. Xi nu was an arbitrary diffeomorphism. Right? So this can only be 0 if d mu d phi mu nu is 0. Is this okay? So this looks like a lot of work to do get something which I have already derived in very different ways, right? D mu d phi mu nu equal to 0.
But now it shows that for every individual component.
Exactly. So this shows now the following. Okay? So let's imagine that the full action is S Einstein-Hilbert plus S phi plus S psi plus S chi and so on. Where phi refers to a certain set of fields, chi refers to another set of fields, chi refers to another set of fields and so on. Okay? Important thing is that S phi doesn't contain this field psi or this field chi. Okay? These are individual fields.
But there is some coupling between.
No, there are no coupling. That's why I'm written S phi plus S psi plus S chi. Right? This part of the action depends only on phi and not on psi and chi. Okay? This depends only on psi and not on phi and chi. But everything of course couples to gravity. Because metric enters everything, right? So it's not they are completely decoupled.
Direct their direct coupling is not allowed.
There is no direct coupling. There is no direct term in the action which contains both of these sets of fields. Okay. So now we can apply this argument individually on these, because all you have used here is the general coordinate invariance of S phi, right? So as long as S phi is general coordinate invariant and independently S I is general coordinate invariant and independently S chi is general coordinate invariant, we can apply this argument. Okay. It's important for this that S phi doesn't contain any phi. Otherwise what will happen? Otherwise when you calculate, if you have S phi, so all of these are phi, right? See, delta S phi, delta phi I is the equation of motion for phi only if S phi contains all the phi dependence, right? Otherwise the equation of motion is delta S delta phi I equal to 0. Right? So it better be so that these shouldn't depend on phi, right, for this argument to hold. Similarly, these shouldn't depend on psi for this argument to hold.
So then could it be the last one?
Yeah, that we have used the fact that when phi satisfies this equation of motion, this is 0. Right? And without setting this equal to 0, you couldn't have arrived at our conclusion, right? So this is saying that T phi mu nu is conserved when phi satisfies this equation of motion. But now suppose there is a phi dependence inside this. Okay? Then the equation of motion is not delta S phi delta phi I equal to 0. Right? It's delta S phi delta phi I plus delta S psi delta phi I equal to 0. Okay? So then this argument will not hold anymore. Okay? So it's important that the action splits up into sum of actions, okay, each containing one set of fields. Okay? In that case you can conclude that d mu T phi mu nu, the other way, d mu T phi mu nu is 0, d mu T psi mu nu 0, and d mu T phi mu nu 0, and so on.
So this is assumption.
What is the assumption?
They will not couple.
Yes, so this is an assumption about the action, structure of the action. So only if the action has this form, okay, then individual conservation laws hold. Right? So for example, if we consider matter plus radiation, right? If matter is charged, then this will not hold, because then the action contains terms which involve both the matter and the radiation, right? There is an a mu dx mu d tau coupling in the action. Then this will not be true anymore. But if matter is not charged, right, then the total action contains Einstein Hilbert plus the matter action plus the radiation action,
Plus this.
right, plus this cosmological constant lambda square of minus eta energy. So that's an assumption. Okay, so you'll be working on that assumption, and under that assumption, this is valid to use the fact that individual T mu nus are conserved. Right, that's what this is showing.
So even if there is interaction, the sum would be conserved then, like.
Yes, but then it will not help us.
If you have interactions in phi inside,
Yes,
you can
then
have some equation.
exactly. Then T phi plus T psi will be conserved and T chi will be independently conserved. Exactly.
And so my last one was that this equation you have derived from the field theory, like in taking the general coordinate invariance as the symmetry of the action actually.
Yes.
But corresponding to this, in the flat case, I am having the energy momentum conserved due to your translational invariance, like.
Yes. So in flat space you derive, you see that's a different definition of the energy momentum tensor, right? Which is by using Noether procedure.
Yeah, but like in this the energy momentum tensor there is conserved due to the translational invariance.
Exactly.
And by the Lorentz transformation invariance you get the angular momentum conservation.
Exactly.
But the parallel seems to have been kind of a different.
No, yeah. So this is a different derivation of the conservation law, right? And in general, this definition of T mu nu and the flat space definition from through Noether procedure may not always agree, right? Because this definition, for example, will always give a symmetric energy momentum tensor, right? Because they are taking the variation derivative with respect to G mu nu. Right? G mu nu is a symmetric tensor. Okay? Flat space energy momentum tensor is not always symmetric. Okay? So this is a slightly different definition. For all practical purposes, this agree. Okay? The total energy that it defines is the same as that you get in flat space.
I'm saying they correspond to different kinds of symmetries in both cases. Like there it is the translational invariance.
Yeah, because there it was global symmetry. See the derivation of energy momentum tensor is quite different in flat space and in curved space. In flat space, it's a consequence of northern charge, right? Because global symmetry was a killing vector. Okay, of the metric. That's what you use. Here there is no killing vector. Okay, the metric can be completely general. Nevertheless, this energy momentum tensor exists and it is conserved. Right? But it's conserved in this range that it's d mu t mu nu equal to 0 and not del mu t mu nu equal to 0. Okay. So while it for most purposes, okay, the two definitions agree, okay, procedure is different. Okay. And when you say t mu nu appears on the right hand side of the Einstein-Hilbert equation, Einstein equation, is this definition which you have to use. Right? Because you derive, if you start from an action principle and try to derive the Einstein's equation, okay, the definition of t mu nu that you use is this one. Right? Because that's the way you derive the Einstein equation from the action. Then you take that variation and derivative as to g mu nu, and whatever you get by taking this variation and derivative, you call t mu nu. So as long as you are dealing with theory of gravity, right, this is the t mu nu you should use. And in this context, the statement is that if the action contains a set of decoupled terms, then the corresponding energy momentum tensors are conserved in this sense. Right? Even though these are not strictly decoupled because gravity always couples to them. Right? But that doesn't matter, these still hold. Okay? What is important is that there should be no term in the action that couples two of them directly. Okay. So then we will proceed with this assumption that individually energy momentum tensors of matter, radiation and cosmological constant are conserved. Okay. That the action doesn't contain any term that couples the two, and then we will see what we get from there. Any questions?
Sir, in natural case scenario, we expect at least particles to be charged, means at least the particles to couple with electron.
Well, most particles which are contributing to, okay, the one is, it is true we expect the particles to be charged, right? But that coupling, that effect of a coupling is small enough, okay, so that you don't have to worry, because basically what happens, most of the particles exist as hydrogen, proton and electron bound together, right? So the coupling of the electromagnetic field to these is through dipole coupling. Right? There is no direct coupling to the charge. Okay? In the early universe, okay, when the temperature was sufficiently high so that the hydrogen was ionized, okay, then we did have to take into account this fact. There is a coupling and they could exchange energy, okay, and you have to then estimate how much energy could have been exchanged.
But there we don't need separately because that is already radiation dominated.
Yes, if it already becomes radiation dominated, then the matter part can be ignored. Right? So this is relevant only when all components are equally important. Right? If you can argue that one component gives very small contribution, right, then you can just set it to equal to 0. Okay, and you reduce one after variables. Okay. But we will be setting up this general problem because we will see that while in general, okay, one or other components may dominate at some time. Okay. As you evolve in time, right, there are time periods of time where more than one component becomes dominant. Right? And there you have to make some assumption to go ahead with this analysis.